Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today for the course. And welcome everybody, especially people joining from different parts of Africa. I think there are more people from the Data Science Zimbabwe group. So thank you so much again for spreading the word and joining in such numbers. I'm extremely excited to teach this course today. A bit about me before starting off with the course. I am Utsav. I have been working in the data science and product industry for the last 6.5 years. I started my career with an e-commerce company back in India, and I am currently a senior data scientist at Uber working in San Francisco. Here's a quick look at my journey. I was born and brought up in New Delhi in India. I started from Delhi University, went to work with a e-commerce company named Snapdeal back in India, which grew to be a multi-billion-dollar business. I moved to Uber in 2017 in India, and then I moved to San Francisco in 2019 for Uber Eats, and I'm currently a senior data scientist working at Uber Eats. So I and my co-founder have started this venture named Career Now. We are trying to help students, especially people like you, to learn and also with their mentoring program. So this is welcome to today's course, which is a take on introduction to SQL for data science. As many of you know, SQL is extremely important. The basic primary tool that every data scientist or every data person should know. So whether you are applying for a product analytics or any analytics role or a data scientist, machine learning course, or data engineering or product management, or even in marketing analytics, SQL is the bedrock for doing and running all kinds of analysis. Right. So this is going to be a introduction course. I'll try and keep this the first session. This as you know is a 4-part series. We're going to learn a lot. I'll share all these recordings over our YouTube channel. Please, if you just see the subscribe button before below the current stream, please click the subscribe button so that we can update you as soon as we get the new videos out about the courses. Right, and let's begin. So today we are going to use Mode platform. So we had sent a link earlier to create the account on Mode. So if you have created the accounts, that's amazing. If you haven't, you can still sort of follow along today and get the basic gist of the syntax and how we solve problems through SQL and get the data and get the running. Uh, in the later videos or when you're watching the recording, please get added to our WhatsApp group. If you know anybody, just post me the numbers and I can add them to the WhatsApp group, and then I can sort of personally help to create the account and also get through all of this exercises. We will also be posting a lot of homework questions post this session, so that you not just learn from this particular session, but also follow up with those problem sets and help you gain more understanding of the subject matter. All right, let's kick it off. So I want to say that the basic or the fundamental reason that any company hires a data person, or why data scientists or analysts or data engineers are needed, is to solve problems through data. Right, that is the first and foremost thing that is required for you to do. A lot of the courses online currently follow a model where they just focus on syntaxing. We want to do a bit different. We want to first let you understand what problem are we solving, and then use SQL to solve those problems. Right. So each of today's questions is based on a problem set, and we are always trying to solve a problem. And while solving that problem, we'll learn about different syntaxing and how do you solve these problems through SQL and data science. All right, sounds good. Also, this is the first live stream that I'm doing, so keep posting on the chat whatever reactions you have. It would be awesome to just gauge and see if you're understanding it correctly or not. Please keep posting if you have any doubts or any questions that you have within the session. I'll try and address them through the stream or after the stream at the end of the session. All right. So cool. Let's start off with what exactly is SQL. So SQL is structured query language. Um, so this means that you can query structured databases. Now, what exactly does a structured database mean? So if you have ever come across a table in Google Sheets and Excels or whatnot, you would have seen that the table is broken down into columns and then rows, right? So each cell of the table represents a value. All right. So now, as you can see here, there are some uh, columns. So you won't see this because I've already run a pre-run query, but we'll just run the first query and you'll be able to see this. So these are the column names: name, homepage URL, category code, funding total, USD, and etc. And then the row are just numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, going up till 100, right? Because I've restricted the amount of rows to 100. You can query more data as well. And each of the row represents a particular value. So homepage URL, the third row, represents a particular value, right? Yeah, if you're having trouble accessing mode, don't worry too much. You can watch the recording later. I can help you personally set up any workspaces. It's um, it's pretty easy. You just create the account. In the workspace, you can create any, like, you can give any name that you want, and then start off by adding your first query, right? Or your first session. Cool. All right. So let's jump on to the first section. We have plenty to cover in the first hour. So I'll get through this and then I'll take the questions at the end. All right. So selection and filtering. So the first and foremost thing is to get some data. All right. So now you have a particular database or a table name. That's what we refer in SQL. So you can have multiple tables in a particular database, and if you want to query a one particular table, you can select that and then query some data out of that table. All right. Let's see what exactly do we mean by this and how can we query this data. So if you see this button at the arrow, it will show you a list of publicly available databases, right? So these are all the database that Mode has on its platform, which are publicly available, right? So you can just write a select query or a SQL query to generate or query the data from that table. Today, we're going to use a very interesting database, which is named tutorial.crunchbase companies claim data. So Crunchbase, if you know, is a US startup which has data about other startups. So any funding deals that the startups would have done, any acquisitions that startups would have been made, would be captured by the Crunchbase database. Okay, so this is a very interesting database, and let's try and understand what exactly this is. So I've mentioned it here. I'll share these files as well after our session through email if you've registered, or through WhatsApp group if you're on that WhatsApp group. Okay. So cool. Let's start off by querying our first query. Okay. So the first thing is which table are we selecting, right? Which means that we have to mention that table. How do we tell the system that we want to query that particular table? So we write from, and let's copy this table name from here. Okay. So we want to mention the system that we are querying it from this table. Now, what do we want to query? So let's write select. We want to select some columns. What columns do we want to select? If you press star, just star, SQL will, or system will, understand that we have to query all the rows and all the columns from the database. Okay, so you write select star from the table, And then what I'm going to do is limit all our queries for today at 100. So we only get the first 100 rows. Okay. Now this will just optimize the resources and help us save precious time. Okay. So now limit and 100. And after each SQL query here, and in most of the IDEs or where you would run SQL queries, you have to end your query with a semicolon. Okay. So this means that this query is ended, and you just select this query and you press Control Enter or Command Enter if you're using Mac. Okay. Let's run our first query. Okay, perfect. So now what we have done is told the system to select star or all the columns from this particular table. So you can see there are permalink, name, homepage URL, category, country code, state code, etc. And all of these columns are in that table. So you've queried the entire table and then picked the first 100 rows. How do we do that? We just limit the number to 100. Okay, so congratulations on writing your first SQL query. So select the columns that you want. If you mention star, then you get all the columns from the table name, and then you can limit the amount of rows that you want. Okay, cool. So now most of the times you don't actually need all the columns to analyze, right? A table can have tens of columns or hundreds of columns if you're dealing with a very big table. So you only want to query a section or subsection of the data set. Okay, so now what you can do is do select. You know that you have to mention from. Let's just copy the table name from here, from this table, and then let's put in the limit 100. Okay, and then a semicolon. Now what are we selecting? So we are selecting, the question is get the name, category, and total funding from the data set. Okay, it mentions only 100 rows. So now there is, that there is a column named name. So you can select name, then you have category code, and then you have a funding total USD. Okay, so now you're mentioning these three particular columns, and if you select the whole query and just run it, now you can see that we have selected the columns that we want to analyze. Okay, so we have the name, we have the category code, and then we have the funding total USD. Okay, and we restricted everything to just 100 rows because we put a limit to 100. Okay, there are homework questions. We will share these homework questions after the session so that you can also practice. All right, so let's move on to other things in aliasing, which will really help build out a very clean query for us. What exactly does aliasing do? So you see here that the name of the column is category underscore score code and funding underscore total underscore USD. Now this really helps when you're creating a table, but not so much when you are visualizing the data. All right. So what we want to do is we still want to get the same columns, which is name, category, and funding. However, what we want to do is we want to rename these columns. Okay. Now we only want to rename these columns at the front end is when we are actually reading the data or visualizing the data. We're not making any changes to the backend or how the data is stored. Okay, so let's see how we can do this. So you know the drill, you write select. Now you know by now that if you want to select these particular column names, we just mention these columns. So name, we have category, code, we have the funding total USD, and then we can do from the table name, and then just limit and a semicolon. Now, how do we rename this? We just use the aliasing function named as. So name, let's rename this as capital N and followed by name. Category as just category. and then funding total as just funding. Okay. Now let's query this to select and hit run. Perfect. So now you see that the column names have been changed, at least in the front end, on how you visualize the data. So category code has been changed to category, and then funding total USD has been changed to funding. Now, this really helps when you're visualizing or presenting the data so that your stakeholders or any business person that you're presenting does not have to see the real column names on how you query, but they get to see what you choose the column names to be. Okay. Now there are again further homework questions, and then you can work on that, and we'll also post solutions post the sessions. Okay. Now, quick fun fact: as you have used the as function or the aliasing function for the table names, sorry, for the column names, you can use similarly for the table names as well. Okay. So now let's edit this query and write as T, just a short form for table. Okay. And you run the query, and you'll see that the output is the same. All right. So you can use the table names and alias the table names as well. So this becomes very, very handy when you have longer queries and you're writing multiple queries, and you can just reference that aliasing function. Okay. Now, let's move on to a very important topic, which is filtering. So what does filtering mean? So most of the databases or tables have huge amount of data. With big data, you can have millions and millions of rows. So you technically don't, as you don't need all the columns, you technically don't need all the rows from the data. You're always trying to analyze a problem, and for analysis, you're looking at chunks of data or filtered data, right? Now, what you can do in SQL is use something called as conditional filtering. Okay. Now, what exactly does this mean? So you can filter your data by a specific condition. Okay. Let's see what exactly the question is. So the question here is get all the data from the country USA. Okay. So now we don't exactly just a second. So we don't use the entire um, table or the data set, but we only are querying a part of the data set where the country is equal to USA. Okay, let's see how this happens. So you know the drill. You select. Let's get all the columns first. So select from the table name as well, and let's mention this as T. What we are going to use is a condition named where, or a function named where. So what this does is it defines where. Then you need to provide the column name. So in here, we're going to use the country column. So country code is equal to USA. And then let's put in a limit equal to 100. Okay. Now I'll just walk you through this code. All right, we have the results. So now what we have done is we have selected all the columns first from this table that you already know. And we have applied a condition where country code is equal to USA. So now if you look at the table set and just scroll to the country code and scroll down, you'll see that all the country codes are USA. So now you've filtered all your data by just this country code. Okay. So now this is called conditional filtering, and that is where we use the where function. Okay. Now, as we have used equal to, you can define different conditions based on what you want and what kind of problem you're solving. So let's look at the other function. So here it mentions get 100 rows of data where funding raised is more than $1 billion, right? So this is interesting. Let's look at the companies which have raised more than $1 billion. You know the drill, select star from this table, SP, and then where we're going to use this column, funding total USD. And this says which is more than $1 billion. So let's use greater than equal to, and 1 7 should be right if I'm not mistaken. And then let's limit this to 100. Let's query this. All right, now you see that there are so many companies which have raised more than $1 billion. Okay, so you have a lot of these companies, life care companies and mobile companies which have raised so much money over the years, right? So this means that you can query the data and filter it out by using different conditions. So not just equal to, but you can use greater than, less than, and whatever your logical operators are. Okay, so we'll be posting different questions, and then you'll be using different conditions to solve those problems, right? Now let's jump on to the next condition, which is again a very important condition, which is how do you get data for multiple um, values, right? So let's say the question is get all the data from these particular countries. So you want to get countries, analyze data from countries such as France, Netherlands, and Germany, right? So now you know that we have to select star from a particular table name, and then where you know that we have to use the country code is in, and then you mention the list of names. So here the country code uses um, the the actual codes of the countries. So I think the code of the countries for France, Netherlands, and is if sorry is FRA, and then NLD, and then I think DEU for Germany. Let's put in the limit to 100, and let's run this query. So now you have all your data, again, all your columns because you did select star. But if you look at the country code, we filtered it out to DEU, which is Germany, France, and then if you scroll down, then you'll also find Netherlands, right? So this really means that you can put in multiple values within a particular condition, and then use the in operator to mention that country code will be in France, Netherlands, and Germany, right? Now let's use another operator, which should be pretty simple. Now the function is get data from all the countries except the United States, right? Because the data is skewed. Crunchbase is a US based company. It mostly has data about US startups. So what we want to do is we want to query the data where it's not US, but we want to analyze the other parts of the world as well. Okay. So now let's quickly write select star from this where country code is not equal to USA and limit by 100. Perfect. So now the query ran. If you look at the country codes, you'll see all the different kinds of countries: Australia, Brazil, Romania, Sweden, etc. But you won't see USA because you've filtered that out. Okay. Now there is another operator. So you can write either not equal to as this, or you can just use this and this. That also works in SQL. And you get the same result. Okay. Now let's move to, so these were something called as single conditions. So you only had one condition. Now what you can do is have different conditions stacked over each other. Okay. And if you've studied logic gate, ands and ors, These are the logic gates would define on how you put these conditions. Okay. Now let's again understand this in via a particular problem. So the question is get all data for $100 million plus funding rounds in India. Okay. So now let's use this. So select and then star from this. This is pretty standard. You already know this. Where so it says the funding round should be greater than $100 million. Funding total USD should be greater than equal to if I'm not wrong, then let's use and the country code is equal to IND or India. You can use different country code if you want to analyze some other country, right? So let's run this. And you have a lot of different companies. So there's a local company named Flipkart, which raised I think $5.4 billion. So you can analyze different countries. But the important point here is that you can stack different conditions. So you can use multiple conditions. So now you have a question saying how many companies were there who had raised more than a certain amount, in this case $100 million, in a particular country, right? So you want both of these conditions to be a and operator. So you want both of these conditions to be true, and hence you used and A&D, right? Now let's see how we can use the or operator. So now the question is get the company details where either it is a clean tech company or the status is acquired. Okay, so now we want to look at all the companies which are in the clean tech genre or in that category, or they have been acquired. Okay, so you know the drill by now. Select star from this particular table name where the category code is equal to, I think, clean tech, if I'm not wrong, or the status is equal to acquired. Let's see if I'm doing everything right. Clean tech and acquired. I think this should work. And let's put in a limit as well of 100 rows. Let's run this query. Perfect. So this ran. Let's look at the results. Now you can see that you have these two columns which you put the condition on, which is category code and then status. So you see that the status would be acquired, or if it's not acquired, like this one, it will be a clean tech company, right? This is exactly what we wanted. We wanted a or condition, which is either the company should be a clean tech company or the company should have been acquired, or the status of the company should be acquired. All right. So this is just showing you that you can solve different problems by using different or stacking different conditions as you want. All right. So if your business problem is, doing drilling more down in a particular country or region or whatnot, you can stack it up and use and operators. If it's either or, you can use the or operator, right? So you can stack multiple conditions on how you want. Cool. Yeah, just keep posting in the chat if you are able to follow. That's because it's not interactive. I can't see you guys, you folks. So just keep posting on the chat on how you're liking it and any questions that you have. Yeah. Now let's look at a another operator, which is apart from like and or, what else you can use. So the question is get all data from mid-stage funding rounds, right? So there are, if you know about startups, there are multiple rounds that you can raise. So there are like round one, round two, round three, and more mature rounds. So you want to get all data. And when it says all data, you just want to select star from a particular company where the funding round, I think if I'm not wrong, if it's the funding rounds, funding rounds is between 2 and 4. Okay, let's put a limit and I'll just explain you what the query is doing. So now you see what it has done is that it has filtered all your data. If you look at the funding rounds, it has restricted to 2, 3, and I think you'll see somewhere 4 as well, right? So there are no other funding rounds. We are only looking at companies which are in the mid-stage funding, okay, which is round 2 to 4. Now you can use the between operator for this so that it becomes easier for you to query, right? So now what you've done, the only thing to remember in between is that it will include both the conditions. So it will also include 2 and 4. Okay, so it's inclusive of the range that you give. Yeah, don't worry if you're not able to create a workspace right now. You can always watch the recording. I'll help you with any technical difficulties that you're getting in mode. Cool. All right. Everyone following here? I see people typing following. So I'm hoping that people are following through this course. If not, you can always watch the recording back and also code it out yourself, which is the best way to practice and learn. Okay. Now let's look at some of the math operators that you can actually put on. Okay. So now the question again here is get the name, country, category, funding, and funding in millions from a particular data set, from the data set that we're using. Okay, so you know the drill. It mentions that we have to select these columns. You know the column names, which is name. You have country code. You have the category. So text with code. You have the funding total USD. From this table, ST, and let's put in the limit as 100. Okay. Now, what you have to do is there is the question says you have to find the funding in million. Okay, so you have to essentially change this column and introduce a new column. Divide this by 10 raised to the power 6, which is for millions. Okay, and you know that you can rename this column. So funding in millions. Let's try this query out and see what this does. Okay, so now what you can see here is that you have created another column based on a particular column. Okay, so you already had a funding total USD, and now you created another column funding in millions, which is nothing but this divided by million, right? So now this has been converted to 5.05 million. This has been converted to 7 million, and so on and so forth. So this just becomes easier for the person who's viewing the data to analyze and view it. So what this does is that you can use different math operators or mathematical operators in your query, and you can sort of use that on top of the columns that you have, and then create more columns or adjust those columns or whatnot. Right? I've posted a link. I'll also post this in our space later. So if you go to this link, this is the Postgres all math operators. So you can do a lot of things. You can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, your normal math operators, and you can do other operators as well. So square root and squares and absolute functions and whatnot. And here's the entire list of what different math operators you can use on a particular column to create more columns or analyze your data, right? Cool. And let's move to the aggregations and grouping. So we are almost at the halfway stage for session 1. I hope that you are enjoying this session and following along. Even if you're not, I've already created a space for us to chat. So either through mail, you can reach out to us through mail or the invitation that we send you. If not, just feel free to post it on the WhatsApp group. Any questions that you have, we're happy to answer any questions or any doubts that you have based on the sessions. And before we move on further, I would I would like you to sort of like our LinkedIn page and follow us there, and also the Instagram channel. So let me just post those here again. So just click on this button and you should be able to follow on LinkedIn. We generally post every day or every couple of days with different things. So if you want to learn more about different verticals or different career paths, or just technical content or videos about different people who have made it to Google or LinkedIn or Facebook and hear about their interview process and whatnot, you can get to learn a lot more. Okay. So here, that's the LinkedIn. Please follow that. And here's the Instagram for you to follow if you're more a Insta person. All right. Cool. Thank you so much for doing that. If you haven't, please do it. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where this will get posted. And that's how you will get the access to this course and the further sessions as well, and all the other awesome content that we will be putting out. There's tons of information already on YouTube, and you can find a lot of different videos and content there as well. All right, let's begin with the next part of the session. And here is where we get to interesting parts and get to analyze more about the data and what we're working with today. Okay, so very important topic again, aggregations and grouping. This is sort of the bedrock of why you write SQL queries and how you analyze data. So if you've ever sort of used Excel or whatnot, if you ever used Excel or Google Sheets, you have seen that people use, counts and sums and averages and all of these different things to represent the data. Okay, so because you're not, most of the times are not analyzing individual rows or individual data, but what you're looking for is a representation of data in the form of the total number of funding, or the sum of a particular column, or the count of the rows, or the average of a particular value and whatnot. Okay, so now let's look at how you do that. So the question is, get the total rows in the data. All right. So now let's look at how we can do this. So you know that we have to select something. In this case, what we need to select, we don't know. It just mentions get the total number of rows. So what do you mean by number of rows? And that just means that you have to count something. Okay. So what you can do is count, but what exactly do you count? So in this case, because you're just caring about the total number of rows, you can just write count star, right? And you know how to name a column name. So you can alias this as and write as total underscore rows. Okay, you know the drill. You just do from, and let's copy this thing. So from this particular table. And though we don't require this, but let's still good practice to put in a limit so that you make sure that you're not putting a lot of load on the system and not querying a humongous amount of data. Okay. Now let's try and run this and see what output it gets. Perfect. So now what this has done is counted the number of rows the table has. Okay, so this means that the table has 27,327 different rows. Okay, so that's the amount of data that we are dealing with. Because this is a publicly available data set, it has 27 or 30,000 rows. But if you're working in a company or working for a firm, you'll see that these tables will have millions and millions of rows. All right. So if you do a count star for, let's say, a company like Uber, there would be millions and millions of rows of data that you can get. Okay. So now, so this is how you get the total number of rows in a particular data. Okay. Now, the next question is, how do you get the total number of distinct categories in the data? Again, I see a lot of you sort of having some issue in creating the workspace URL name. Just given any URL name, it doesn't really matter, as long as you're able to create a URL and then get to the query building or the query writing part. Even if you're not, just follow this course for today, and after the session, you can go ahead and practice. Post these questions in the Google group, or email us or WhatsApp, and I'll be able to assist you with creating this workspace. All right, cool. So now let's see how do we solve this question, which is get the total number of distinct categories in the data. Okay, so now you saw that we had different categories, right? So you had mobile, you had e-commerce, you had health tech and whatnot, or clean tech and whatnot. Now you want to look at, like, what are the different categories in the data? How many categories do we have, right? So let's see, select. What we want to do is total numbers. You know that we are dealing with a count. So count, and it says distinct, because if we just count categories, it will just return the amount of rows that we have, right? Now count distinct, and then the category code, which is the column that we are dealing with, as distinct category, or total distinct categories. Okay, from, the table that we are working with, and let's also put in a limit of 100. Let's query this. Perfect. So now you see that we have 42 different categories in the data set. Okay, cool. This is how you can use count and distinct, and then count a particular column to see how many distinct types of or values of those categories or that particular column we have. Okay. Now, the next part is interesting, which is get the total number of overall funding. So select. Now we're dealing with numbers or numerical data, which is the funding total USD column. Okay. Now, if it says get the total number of overall funding, what it really means is that we have to sum up all the fundings throughout the table and then get the output of that particular column. Okay. So now let's see how we can do this. So select sum of funding total USD as total underscore funding from this table and limit 100. So let's run this. Now, if we run this, we see that there is a crazy number. Like it's we can't even calculate how much this is. So let's actually use the math operator here. So let's divide this by probably billions, 10 raised to the power 9, and let's rerun this query. So now this is a much more readable number. So the number is 360. This is in billions, so $360 billion. So what this means that all the rows, all the companies which have raised these funding, the total funding that they have raised throughout the entire table is $360 billion. Okay, so this is how you can use sum operator over a column which is on a numerical data set or a numerical value. Okay. There are a few homework questions. We'll be posting more homework questions for you as well in future to get this. Cool. So now let's see. Just a second. Yeah. So now I want to highlight this. So if you click on this link again, we'll be posting these links. This will introduce you to different aggregate functions that you can use. So apart from count, count distinct, sum, averages, and all of these things, you can actually use a lot of different aggregate functions, right? So you can do, again, your JSON functions and a lot of different things. You can read through this entire doc, and you can use regular expressions and whatnot. Okay. So we'll be posting these links after the session, and you can go through and see what different aggregate functions you can use on your data set or on your columns. Good. Let's get back to the next question, which is get the maximum, minimum, and average of the funding. This should be pretty simple. Select, and then you want to write the max of. So that's max of funding total USD as max funding. Write the min of funding total USD as min funding, and then the average of funding total USD, and let's just do average funding. Let's copy this limit of 100, and let's run this. So when you run this and you get the output, it's just, we'll take, let's probably rerun this. Yep. So the max funding is a crazy number. You can divide this by probably a billion or millions, and you can refactor and reanalyze. I think the maximum funding is $5.7 billion, if I'm not wrong. And then the minimum funding is just a very low number, and the average is about, I think, 1.5 million. So here is how you can use like different operators or different aggregate functions in a particular column and get the kind of analysis that you want. Okay. So apart from this, there are more aggregations, as I had indicated on an earlier link. Now there are more statistical based aggregations as well. So if you click on this link and go to this, you can see that you can use different statistical operators as well. So you can calculate the standard deviation. You can use the variance, the covariance between two sort of columns and whatnot. And you can do percentiles and a lot of different statistical aggregators or operators on the queries or on the column that you're using. And that's how you can get or analyze the data as per the question that you're solving or the problem that you're solving. Okay. Again, these links will be posted after the session, so you can have a look at what are the different stat operators. We'll also be posting questions so that you can use these stat operators in the different kind of problems that you're solving. Okay. Perfect. Now, grouping. This is another extremely important topic within SQL on solving problems. So if you've ever worked again on Sheets or Google Sheets or Excel and whatnot, you'll see that there is an extremely important functionality called the pivot function, where you can group by different columns and analyze the data based on those columns or those values. Now let's understand this by a particular question. So group by is the equivalent of performing a pivot function like functionality through SQL and code. Okay. Now the question here is get the number of companies by each country. So you don't just want to count the number of companies, but you want to get a count of companies by each particular country. Okay. Let's see how we can do this. So select. You know that we have to count something. So count and companies, which is just name. Let's just count the name of the companies as companies, or total companies. That we have to query, sorry, this particular data set. Just copy it from here. Now what we have to, so let's just run this first. So if you run this first, you'll see that it gives the total count, which is just 27,327, which we know. What we want is we want this broken down by a particular column, which is country in this case. So let's introduce this. So let's write country code, comma, count of name, which is we have redefined as total companies. What we want to do is tell SQL that we have to group it by the country code. And I'll just explain what exactly this does. So let's just try this. Perfect. So now what you have is you have different country codes, and then you have the total number of companies or the count of companies in each of these countries. Okay. So Netherlands has, which is NLD, if you remember, has 181 companies. I think VN would be Venezuela, which is just 2 companies. Austria has 76, etc., etc. So what you can do is use the aggregate functions, which is counts and sums and everything different um, operators that we have seen, the aggregate functions that we have seen, and then group by particular columns so that you can analyze it broken down country code or category code and whatnot. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question, which says exactly what we spoke about, which is get the total funding, but we want to break it down by each country. This should be pretty simple. So you know both the steps. You know the country that you have to group it by country code. And for summing, you have to use the funding total USD as total funding. Then from just mention this. What you need to do is just group by, make sure that you're grouping by the correct column, the country code. Let's analyze this. And you'll see that you have so NLD is a crazy number. I think it's 17 billion. You can use a math operator to further analyze this number and make it more attractive so that you can read these numbers. So essentially what you've done is by country, you've broken down how much funding has each country received in the entire data set. All right, cool. And again, there are more homework questions that we'll be posting so that you can use a lot of these different things and analyze different sets of problems. Now, as we use the AS operator, what you can do is also use the numbered aliasing. So let's see how this works. Get the overall funding in each country, in each category. So now instead of the country, you just use the category code. You get the funding total USD as total funding. You know that you have to use this. And instead of group by the column name, you can actually alias it with the number. So category code is the first column, or index is 1, and then funding total is index 2. Okay, so group by 1, which is this, and let's select. So this essentially means that you no longer have to use the entire or type in the entire column name. If you want to do that, if it looks better on the code and whatnot, you can definitely use that. Or if it's a longer query and you don't want to type multiple times, you can just use the numbered aliasing. Remember that the index starts at 1. So the first column would be 1, category code is 1. So you just group by 1. And you see that here you have broken the data down, or the total funding down by different category codes. Okay, so that's local, hardware, pets, security, fashion, etc. So you can analyze which category has got how much funding in the entire data set. right? Cool. All right, so I think this is we're almost at time, and let's go 5 minutes over and complete the last topic, which is sorting. So what does sorting mean? So essentially, you see that here the data is actually not sorted; it's just random numbers. Okay. So what we want to do is sort the entire data set or the query that we are writing by a particular column. Okay. So let's say in the question is that get the total funding by each country and sort it by the lowest funding. So let's use the select and by each country. So you know that you have to group by the country code. You have to get the sum of total funding, and from this you can group by 1. Okay. Now let's run this. So you know already we had run this query already, so you know that we get the total funding by each of the country, broken down by each country. Okay. Now what you want to do is sort it by the lowest funding. So let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just mention the column. So let's use a function called order by. So as the name suggests, it will just order the entire data set by the column that you mentioned. So you want the lowest funding, which means that you want to use this column, the total funding column. And you want to say that it is ascending, or you want it by lowest funding, sorted by lowest funding. Let's run this. So now you see that you have the same data set. You have countries and then you have total funding broken down by each country. Okay. However, the data is sorted by the total funding as ascending. So you have the lowest funding country, which is CMR. I think it might be Cameroon. Then it's NER, then BGD, etc., and it's moving on. So it's in the ascending way, like the total funding has been sorted by ascending. Okay, so this is how you can sort it by different columns and the basis that you want. So let's look at the second question, which is actually better. We want to know which are the highest countries. Okay, so let's actually copy the entire thing because it's essentially the same query. And then instead of ASC, what you could mention is DESC, which is descending. Okay, so let's run this. And you can see that the total funding, I think it's not picking the null values. We need to do something to remove the null values, but actually let's do that. So let's actually use, because you know already how to filter the condition. Let's say that the funding total USD has to be greater than 0 for it to be accounted. Okay, and let's try and run this. Perfect. So now you see that the highest funding has been received by US. I think it's some $270 billion. Then it's Great Britain or UK. And there's China, there's Canada, there's India, etc. So now you know that which are the top 5 or the top 10 countries and whatnot. Okay. Now you see here that the one of the countries is actually null. So this is saying that the company wasn't assigned any country code. So we don't want to look at that. So how can you do that? So you just use another filtering condition saying where funding total USD is greater than 0 and the country code is not equal to a blank value. Okay. Now let's run this. Perfect. So now in this query, you have almost used all the things that you have learned today. So you have selected the columns that you wanted. You've used a sum aggregator to count the total funding. You've used the from operator, which is just from that particular table. You've used two different conditions, which is where funding total USD is greater than zero, because we want to weed out all the companies which had no funding. It's just bad data. And we also don't want any companies which have a null country code or has a empty string in their country code. Okay, so then you have stacked these two different conditions with a AND operator. What you've done then is just group by it by country code, because you're calculating the total funding by countries. Okay, and then at the end you want to sort the data in a way where you get the maximum amount of funding first, and then in a descending order. So you mentioned order by the column name, which is total funding, and then DESC, which is just telling it by descending, all right, sorted by descending order. Cool. So this query has mostly all the things that you've learned today. There are different sort of, what you can do is, just use the same thing. And there is a very nice, I think there's asked in a lot of interviews as well, get the top 10 countries with the highest funding. You know the drill. You can actually just copy this query. Instead of using the limit 100 function, because it says the top 10, you can actually just mention 10. So limit 10, if you run this query, you'll get to know which are the top 10 countries. So there's US, there's UK, there is China, there's Canada, India, the US, Germany, France, Israel, Japan, and Chile, I think. So these are the top 10 countries which have the highest funding. Now, this is, you can be asked this in an interview question or a live coding question, or just generally if you're working in a company, saying, hey, what are the top 10? What are the top 50? What are the top 100 things with a particular column, or the highest funding, or the highest orders if you're working in a e-commerce setup and whatnot. And you can use this particular query to answer that question. Again, remember that you're always answering questions while writing code. You're not just blindly writing code. Okay, so this essentially, I think, is the last thing that we'll learn today. For next Thursday's topic, we'll go dive deeper into um, uh, more coding and more topics within SQL. SQL is a humongous sort of language, cannot be learned in a single session. And we'll learn more about joins and how you can join different data sets and whatnot, and perform different queries. Meanwhile, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get update on when we'll do the next live stream. I think it's next Thursday, the same time. And please subscribe to follow us on LinkedIn. We already have pasted let me just post the link again. So follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Insta, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can get a lot of these updates. Please let us know via email or in the WhatsApp group that you have. If you've seen the session live, please tell us how did you like it. You can also just like the button on YouTube. If you're watching this as a recorded session, please hit the like button so that we know what feedback we have. Any feedback, any thing that you have missed out on the course, any questions, any doubts that you have, I know there's a workspace issue. We'll already be working with you to resolve that on Node. If you have any other doubts, any other concerns regarding some questions, regarding some solutions, please post it on the WhatsApp group or write us an email, and we'll definitely be responding back to you. All right. Thank you so much again for joining in from various parts of Africa, especially for thanks to Data Science Zimbabwe, who have partnered with us. And all the best for the next session, and see you on next Thursday. Thank you.